Welcome everyone to Advanced Administration Tips. This is not a let's do 50 tips in 50 minutes thing because I'm not into the listicle. And anyway, it's very hard to actually get across what you want sometimes. Instead, I've taken three main items that affect my daily life as a business partner and as a customer, to be fair. And I think there's something for everybody in here, both from both sides. For the developers who are showing up, you'll probably tell me the parts that I did which are wrong, and that's perfectly fine too. So, okay, oops, wrong screen. There we go. So, my name's Keith Brooks, OpenNTF board member, HCL ambassador, IBM champion as well. I've been around since version 2, ex Lotus EMEA. Me and Roberto go back 25 years together when we were both in Lotus EMEA, and we're happy to be here and do these for everybody. So one of the things that had occurred to me a while back, and I've posted about this in a few places, if you look at everything I just put on the screen, what do those have in common? And to be fair, two of them actually don't have the same thing in common, but they were also in mind of what I was trying to accomplish in this session. So the main question is, what do they all have in common? Notice I've listed, Traveler and the version everything came out down to the on-time group calendar, which, by the way, is really good. If you're not using it, you really should. But that's not what this session is about. So what's really different about these? What are these, and what do they have in common? Well, as it turns out, they're all tasks that you can't monitor, which might not make sense or sound right, but give me a minute and I'll explain why. These tasks, like what you see on the screen, this is the administration client here with, monitoring tab and server and task. And that's all fine and good. And you've got the server task list. But, you can see on there, DB and, Cert Manager isn't there, and where do they all go? How are we monitoring these? Right? Most of us are using a lot of these already in place, but we have no way to see what's happening. Our server is not talking to us and telling us, giving us the insight. Now, for some people, maybe that doesn't matter. You might not care about all of these. You might not even use all of these. But since I've got customers using almost all of these, and I use a lot of them myself on my own personal server, we want to be able to see and hear what's happening. So when I looked into this, I found that between version 9 and version 12, there were 63 tasks that you can monitor. And this is kind of old, and at the bottom of the screen, you can see there's like the X400 stuff, and next to the 9, you can see the fax server. So we had stuff, and it was sitting there all through 12. And then suddenly in version 14, somebody cleaned this up. They got rid of a bunch of the deadwood that we didn't need anymore, and we're down to 52 tasks. But those 10 or so on the right side that have come out since version 8.5 aren't there. To be fair, Traveler is there. Traveler, actually, what happened was Traveler came out at 8.5, but it was not a task for monitoring, and there was a tech note that explained how to make it a task for monitoring. And then eventually in 9, it became a natural task. So as someone who manages, I've got 5, 6 customers that are live right now, not including, a dozen that I deal with during the year extra. The first thing I do with customers is I want to get access. I want to load up my admin client, and I want to see what they're running. When you're one person or you're the admin in a company where you don't have all these other customers, maybe you don't care as much about all of these, but you definitely care about what these are doing. You do care these are running, right? And one of the biggest questions I always ask is, how do you know any of these are running? If there's no task monitoring, you don't even know the task is up. And there's nothing to tell you how that even gets anywhere. And to be fair, the two in the middle, TOTP and DOMI, or dummy, depending on how you want to pronounce it, are not tasks. And that's going to be the second part of the session. The first part is about the tasks. But I put them there because they are things we're using, things we need, and we should know when they're working or not working. So looking at how do we get through our task, there what we want to do is we want to go into the admin client, and the admin client has, believe it or not, an NTF. But we're not going to play with the NTF today. We're going to play with the NSF itself, and that NSF sits only on the admin client machine. So you bring it up in Designer, go over to Forms, and in Forms there's going to be task slash whatever. And for sake of simplicity, I decided to use task slash fixup because it's there. And you're going to copy it, and then you're going to paste it, and you're going to end up with a copy of task slash fixup. So when you open up the copy, you're going to edit the form properties and make it look like this screenshot I have on the left, where it's going to be task slash auto update pipe task underscore auto update, and put in the comments as a description. And this is just the basic part you want to do. So there's actually an entry for these tasks to even be seen, right? This is just part one. Part two involves actually changing the underlying code to match what we're working on. And there's 4 fields we're going to need to mess with: task name, task file name, task monitor name, and the task description. And on the next screen or two, I'm going to show you the form itself. The main thing to understand also is that the task monitor name has to be exactly the name Domino likes to call it. This is not always so known and drives people crazy. They think they set it up and it's not there, but it has to match entirely. So what that looks like from a form, when you open up this was Cert Manager, but it doesn't matter, they all look the same. The 4 that we want to play with, I've listed and numbered, and they're on the side. But you can see where it says context help, there's about 8 or 9 fields there. All those fields are contextual to the task. So for our purpose as an admin, while it would be nice to update all those, I don't need to update them for me to see what I want to see. But I show this and explain it because when you say, well, why didn't HCL change this? Because they would have to literally go through each single one, update all these entries, verify the entries, QA it, test it, mix it, bring it back and forth, do all this stuff. And basically somebody, probably not a developer, but somebody, like myself, will basically go and do it, but it would take us a good week or so to put them in. And then obviously if we want to pull any out, we have to do that too. So the time has not been there and they haven't got to it, but it is a request I made in AHA, and it is something which I do keep asking about because we're getting more and more tasks. And the more tasks we have running, the more chance we have of something not running. And I prefer to be proactive and know in advance rather than reactive when the customer calls and says we have a problem. And so that was what my thinking was in what some of the topics I'm discussing. So this is an example of how you get the name. When you do a load task, in this case it's load REST API, you see it says starting X, so in this case Domino REST API. That Domino REST API is the Domino task monitor name that we need to put into that field that I showed in the previous screen. And you can see on the bottom right, this is the task tab or the task dashboard in the admin client. And you've got a list of Domino REST API right there. So this is where you want to go, and this is what you want to use, and this is how you want to put it all together, so that at the end of the day, or in the beginning of your morning, depending on how you do it, you get to see this full view, which comes out in the admin client and is really nice. Of course, this is probably 40 or 50 of the tasks like shown here, but I did this also to point out what they're going to look like and act like for those who don't use this. I use this daily, actually many times a day. I don't know if other people do or not. I definitely think people should, but I understand why they might not. So you can see from the right side, I've got a new screenshot of the task. You can see auto update now is up there, and about 6 down is Cert Manager, right? Because I've added those into the database, into the task, and now they show up. And auto update has a description. The auto update task handles the updating of the Domino software. And yes, I made a typo and I didn't correct it. Missed that one. On the bottom of the screen, I've got the example of the Domino REST API running for one of my customers that I've got it up and running. And then with that big long view of a few servers, starting on the right side, you've got TOTP, which is not a task, but I created one because I was trying to figure out if I could figure out a way to get it, but there is no way. Next to it is restore, which is with backup. Next to that one is the on-time group calendar. Then you've got NOM for Nomad, and Nomad is running on both guys. Then we've got DeerSync, then we've got Cert Manager, Backup, Auto Update, and then I've added DBMT, because DBMT is one of those things where we set a program doc and it runs, and no one knows if it did anything. And if I asked you how many people read their log file on a daily basis, I would be pretty surprised if anybody did, unless you're like a junior admin and they told you to so you could get to experience what's happening. Most of us don't read the log file daily, and we rely on functions and information in the system to come to us and tell us what's happening. I rely on this dashboard. Maybe other people rely on possibly other business partner products. Maybe they have some other method in-house for dashboarding. Whatever it is, this, for me, because I work with so many customers, is the best way for me to know what's happening and when and how. And on top of that, as we all know, every time something happens, we immediately get a ticket or a call, and they're like, Domino's down. And of course, I'm looking at the screen, I'm like, well, Domino's not down, right? And you know, what is the task and what's going on? And I can give this to people and share it with them, send them a screenshot and say, hey, it's not us, it's the network, it's this, it's that. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying not just to know your own world, but know the world around you and help everybody get better at what they're doing. So that part was all the fun and tasks. And of course, someone is sitting there going, well, that's great, but what do we do with all the others? So I created a simple cheat sheet for you so you can go in and create all these. Be honest, I did not get time to create a NSF to save and publish. I'm going to try and get that done for next week, and we'll post that someplace in OpenNTF. So it'll include all these plus a couple others that probably aren't here that I didn't get around to using. But they're here. This is what you have to do. It's all pretty simple, right? Just takes a little bit of time. And, you know, of course, everyone's got time, right? So now let me move to the second part, which is going kind of back in history. We all remember what it was like when we were junior admins and we went to DDM and turned everything on, and the next morning came in and have 500 mails, right? And then immediately turned everything off. And then kind of went back like a month later and said, okay, turn on disk space, turn on did NAB replicate, what about this and this and this, right? And that's kind of what I think most of us do. And then we've forgotten how to be specific and how to get information for things that we might need to know. So I started doing this with DBMT because people running DBMT, no one ever knows if DBMT even runs. Yeah, we have a program document, but if you're not looking at the log file, how do you know it did anything? So what I'm going to walk through is how do you create the event and the notification for those stats when you're trying to understand what's happening in your world, and it's not run-of-the-mill built into the events database. So that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be an overview, and then kind of like before, the next screen will be the actual forms, and we'll walk through that. So first off, you have to start somewhere with the events database, right, which is also called monitoring configuration in DDM. And then you're going under advanced select stats by name, which is where we want to start with. And we're going to create a new stat that's going to monitor specific information. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to use DBMT as my examples because it was a lot easier and faster to do. We're going to fill out basics tab with name and description, fill out the advanced tab, so set the threshold value. I'm one of those people who doesn't care if something ran. I want to know when something didn't run. I always want to know what's wrong because I'm assuming the server is doing its job normally. And thank God Domino at this point is a very reliable, reliant, and extremely resilient server. So it's not like we're having the problems we used to have way back when. But it's still important to know when processes are running and doing their jobs. So we define parameters for up and down, successful, unsuccessful, maybe greater than 5, less than 10, who knows, whatever your requirements are. And you keep repeating this for however many items you need, right? And that's just to get the statistic created. And here's how you do it physically. So you go to the database like we talked about. First of all, you need the stat, right? In the next screen, I'm going to explain how to get the stat. But here we're just talking about the events database. Go to event stats by name, create a new stat. In the basic tab, you're putting in the statistic name, which has to be exactly what the statistic name is. You want to put in the statistic unit, which in this case was failures, and notify me about what's happening. And then on the advanced side, we're putting in what the regular value should be, which in theory should be 0, right? Because it should always be successful, but which we know it's not. But work with me here. And then when you go to useful thresholds, you set it to yes, and then the drop down on the bottom will be greater than, less than, to create the value, what severity you want it to be, and then give it some suggested response, right? And that's basically what that looks like, just to set the statistic to be listed. Now, to get the statistic itself, you can get it from the statistics tab in the admin client, or you can do like a show stat something. So in TOTP's case, for instance, it's security.totp.star, and there's, I don't know, it must be 100 stats. Show stat DBMT, though, on the screen, you can see here there's about a dozen, 11 actually, right? And the only one that I wanted to look at was DBMT compact unsuccessful. Now, you could use compact unsuccessful in use, and what that would mean typically is, well, we couldn't run because the database was open, database maybe was being backed up, who knows, whatever it might have been. But so for my purpose, I want it to be unsuccessful, and I want to know what's happening. Because I don't know, DBMT runs every day or every weekend or however you set it, but I want to know it's doing its job, right? Like, I don't want to end up with bad databases or things I got to deal with in the middle of the week. And if you're not using DBMT, which has been around since version 9, you're really missing out, because it really does take care of a lot of issues that normally would happen to people's databases. So that's how you got the stat. That's how you create the stat. Now we actually have to create the generator for the stat, so it tells the system to look for that stat and do something with the stat. So kind of the same way, go to generator, go to event database, and new stat. You've got a basics tab, because you can select by domain, by server. I'm looking in this case just for a single instance statistic, and I gave it the name. It'll be in the dropdown now. Statistic tomorrow will be listed because I've created that in the previous pages. And then when we go to the threshold tab, we're setting the threshold we want to look for. In my case, I want anything greater than 1 to know how many failed. And then we go over to the other tab where we basically remind it we're going to use this as a warning high, because it's not fatal and it's not a failure. It's just something I should be aware of. And we're going to then create the how to notify me, right? So this is all the looking for information and validating that stat, and if that stat has come and doesn't meet my requirement, and now send it to me, right? So now we're going to talk about the how do you send it. So you're going to create an event item, which we did. Go back to the events database, create an event handler, a new one, and we're going to link it to the DDM probe that we've created for DBMT, which basically, when you look at a form, looks like this. You go back, create the event handler, and we've got notify on the event of any server or on specific servers, right? For instance, Domino REST API is not going to run on all my servers. It's not going to run on my mail server, but it'll run on my app server. So I would specifically select that server. Trigger any event that matches, right? Because we want it to be specific here. There's an event handler, event tab. It's a miscellaneous, and the event could be one of these things, but it's also going to be, must include this message. I basically did that because some people may want it to be failure instead of warning, but you can set it up however you want. And then you get to the action and you say, I want to mail it to me, and I want to enable this notification to be running all the time. And that's kind of what it is. I mean, personally, I wish I could get like an X message instead of mail, because at least I know it'll get to me. But for the moment, without OAuth and too much API work, working with what we have, let's just deal with emails. And that's pretty much what you got to do. And if you did it right, you would get this message like I did the other morning after DBMT ran, that 11 of them had a problem. Now, I know, and you know, that there's always databases open. There's always things you can't run against. So it's not uncommon. But if I had this come back and say unsuccessful was like 20, 30, 50, then I know I probably have a disk space issue, or I have some kind of hardware issue, or something's fishy, because it shouldn't be like that. You know, so again, this is what I'm trying to do in order to make my life easier as I manage people's environments, because I'm dealing with individuals, but then I want to know if there's server side issues, and this is the best way to do it. But I think a lot of us kind of in history, because this is not the cool, neat stuff, right? This is the old hardcore. I had to kill myself to figure all this stuff out back when I was a junior admin, and nobody really does this anymore. And the events database doesn't get updated as much as it should. So we have to come up with this stuff. And in the ambassadors chats, a lot of times, some of us are posting, we're trying to figure out what the stats are, or where they are, or how to get some of these information, because we're trying to find out how to do it and where to get it from. So, I hope this has kind of helped you with some of that. So those are the two main things I was trying to get across. Now there's a couple of small things I'm just going to do, and then I'll be done and hand over to Roberta. So for those who don't know, in the admin client, there actually are preferences you can set. You go to File Preferences, Admin Preferences, and then you get this window of admin preferences with 5 subtabs. And for the most part, you can go in and set up your registration stuff. So when you register users, the basic things are there for your customer. That's great. But I want to focus on the Files tab, because a number of years ago, I requested this, and it came out in 10, was I want to know the full text index, that which database had it, and I want to know what mail files were encrypted, or any file for that matter. And at the time, and this was like in the 9 range, we didn't have any of this. But it became an issue because we were doing a lot of upgrades for compliance, people on very old Windows boxes who needed to upgrade, and suddenly we needed to know certain things and see certain things. So luckily this stuff came out in, I think, version 10. These 3 were added. And for those who don't know, you can go and add these to the columns you see when you go into the Files tab, and then you can rearrange the order whatever you want. So I put encrypted first so I can see which ones are encrypted. And you can do whatever you want. Most of us go to there and we just, look for a name, look for the file name, look for Deos, look for size, quota maybe, template, and that's about it. But there's a lot more to be done there that you can play with and get used. And it's really a shame that people don't use it as much. This is just to remind people, if you're not using the backup and restore option, you should really get into it. I use it both for personal and customers, and we do local and network and other integrations. And the greatest thing is notification is here. You don't even have to come up with what's happening. You don't have to go look at the stats. It will tell you and send you automatically what happens. Thank God that they added that, because it really would be a pain to go find that stuff. So I just wanted to add that as a last bit for people who aren't using backup and restore. There's really no reason for you not to go use it. Even if all you're doing is copying that names in SF and saving it so that nothing happens. Just, it's there and you should be using it is really all I can tell you at that point. And so that's pretty much what I had with my session. Roberto is going to pick up his session on some other topics. If there are questions, I will try and be here at the end to answer them. And if not, I will definitely reply through the OpenNTF side. And in keeping with a lot of other things, there's the secret credits tip. One last one for everybody who doesn't use the R console. You can make a toolbar icon for the R console in your Notes client. which is great because it means you don't have to go fiddle with the admin client. You don't have to VPN to a server. You can just pop it up, bring it up, and do what you need to do. And with that, I am going to hand over to Roberto.
With respect to Keith and your stats monitoring, I forget which version was 10, 11. The Grafana integration was added to the Domino server. It might have been 10. And so that Eric is just pointing out that there's the ability to do that integration and use third-party tools to do the monitoring as well.